On today's Murder, She Wrote podcast, I'm going to be covering 2 episodes again. One where Jessica has to solve the murder in a small southern town before it explodes like a power keg. And in the second one, she goes to visit her friend, who she hasn't seen for 30 years, and her friend dies, and she has to solve her murder because everyone and their brother wants her money. Welcome to the Murder, She Wrote podcast, where I watch every single episode of the hit 80s/90s show Murder, She Wrote, starring 3-time Academy Award nominee and 5-time Tony Award winner Miss Angela Lansbury. Today I'm going to be talking about Season 2, episodes 15 and 16 of Murder, She Wrote. As always, if you're new to the Murder, She Wrote podcast, I spoil everything there is to spoil about the episode, the murder, the suspects, everything in between. If you've not recently seen this episode, then please get out your Season 2 DVDs, insert Disc 4, and these 2 episodes are the last ones on that disc. If you do not own the DVDs, then there's 2 ways that you can watch the show for free. On NBC's Peacock app and IMDb TV app. Both can be found on several Roku streaming devices, as well as the Roku TV and Fire Stick. If you have recently seen this episode, sit back, relax, and enjoy, and let's see if we've noticed the same things and feel the same about the episodes, because I did not like these 2. There was a comment on one of my videos, actually a couple of them, where a woman was wondering, are you going to play the show or are you just going to talk about it? This is a podcast where I just talk about the show. I don't play the show. I cannot post any episodes of the show because it is owned by Universal and I would get sued. So, like I said before, if you want to see the show, you can see it for 2 different ways. Free on IMDb TV or Peacock app, or you can buy the DVDs like I did. Guys, everybody, thank you so much for your support. When I was uploading the last episode where I talked about 2 episodes, Trial by Error and Keep the Home Fries Burning, I saw that it had 27 likes, 4 dislikes, 1,000, no, it's up to 10,000 and something views at this point. Thank you. In the words of Sally Field, you like me, you really like me. I can't believe that you're actually listening and you're enjoying what you're listening to, so thank you so much for your support. It means the world to me. And I am almost done with Season 2. It is not going to take me the whole rest of this year to get it done, I promise. I can't believe July is almost over. Sorry, that was my phone. And that we're almost into August, but I am on the second to last disc of Season 2, so we're getting there, and I'm going to do my special episode where I talk about the best and worst episodes of Season 2, like I did with Season 1, with the Season 1 finale that I did, which you can check out here on the channel. But anyway, thank you for your support. It means the world to me. These 2 episodes were not the best. I did not really particularly like them. There were a couple recognizable guest stars, and I realized at the end of the last episode that I did, I said that I was going to be covering coal miners' slaughter. Well, I thought this was coal miners' slaughter because I temporarily forgot what the name of the episode Megan Mullally was in, and I thought this one was it because they have similar plots. But unfortunately, that comes way later, but we'll get to it, I promise. The first episode I'm going to be talking about is similar in plot to Coal Miners' Slaughter, as it's set in a small southern town, and it was filmed on the same backlot, Universal backlot. But the first episode I'm going to be talking about is Power Keg. Season 2, Episode 15, air date February 9th, 1986. So let's get started, and spoilers throughout, because here we go. The episode starts off with two boys walking down the street playing Kick the Can. I loved that game as a kid. It was simple and to the point. It was fun. Car passes them and Jessica is in it with her friend, Professor Ames Caulfield. He apparently is a writer and a professor, and they are coming back from a series of lectures. So anyway, yes, they're coming back from a series of lectures where Mrs. Fletcher has spoken, and so has the professor, and I don't know exactly where they're going, or even where they're at. A sign says they're entering Roper County, and suddenly the professor's car just stops working. But luckily for them, the sheriff randomly shows up. I don't know why he's out there, but he's driving his car, and this is Sheriff Cox. He was recognizable. I think I've seen him in other things. I don't know the actor's name, but I've seen him in other things. And he shows up, and he takes them into town, and they go to the local service station, where we get introduced to the two town bullies, Billy Willis and Andy Crane. They say that they'll fix his car within the week because they have to order some sort of part. So Mrs. Fletcher and the professor go to the local hotel and they check in, and the professor for some reason makes it a point to basically say who he is, and then he's like, and this is Mrs. Jessica Fletcher, the J.B. Fletcher who wrote all them books. And it seems as if the hotel check-in clerk person is not that impressed and says, I have adjoined rooms in the north wing that's left, and you can stay in there. They're not adjoined rooms. His room is across from hers. I noticed that continuity error. Anyway, as they're checking in, we get introduced to Cassie Burns, who used to be a former student of the professor's, and her son, Matthew, who is a local singer. He's going to be singing at Mr. Kelso's bar, named after him, Frank Kelso. Played by the only recognizable guest star that I recognized was Pat Corley, who played the role of Phil on Murphy Brown. But he wasn't on Murphy Brown yet at this point. So we cut to Mrs. Fletcher in her room. The professor asks Mrs. Fletcher if they'll take a late supper so he can go to the bar to see Matthew's performance. And we cut to Mr. Kelso's bar, and this is a weird staging. They had the actor playing Matthew is on the stage. In the middle of the stage, there's no microphone, and he's not singing into the microphone. He is just standing in the middle of the stage, playing his guitar, and at several moments throughout the scene, you can't hear what he has to say. Like, you can't hear the song. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. It's really weird. But he's in the middle of the stage singing. There's a girl named Linda who is taking people's order and going around the bar, and ever so often she stops and she listens to Matthew singing. And I don't know if the actual actor is singing, or like if he's lip syncing to a track that he didn't sing, or if his voice was dubbed and he's lip syncing to someone's voice. There's no information anywhere about that. So suddenly the professor comes in. Mr. Kelso's behind the bar talking about his new gun and how the bullets are custom made for it. And he comes in and he goes, "Can I do something for you, friend?" And he's like, "Scotch and water." So then the local town bully comes Ed Brenner, who hangs out with Andy and Billy Willis from the service station. They take a table from a couple and their local town bully, and Linda comes over, and it turns out that she's Ed's sister. She tells Ed that he should go and make up with their father, but he says, I don't need no lectures from you, sis. You're my sister, not my mother. And she says, all right, but she really wants them to make up. She suddenly turns away from the table and listens to Matthew sing. And then her brother says, he ain't family. You don't need to be speaking to him or looking at him. She says, well, if I'm supposed to stay out of your life, you need to stay out of mine. And he agrees and says, well, get us 3 beers and 3 cheeseburgers. She goes in the back. Ed gets up, goes up to the stage and starts taunting Matthew, saying that a pig that he used to have sounded better than Matthew singing. And Matthew tries to ignore him, but then he insults his mother. And after he insults his mother, he jumps down and they get into a fight, but Ed, of course, gets the upper hand. Billy Willis goes up behind Mr. Kelso with a knife. Andy prevents the professor from intervening. And then Ed picks up Matthew's guitar and basically breaks it and says he never wants to see him performing in Kelso's bar ever again. Linda comes out during the commotion, and she tells Ed to get out of the bar. He leaves. Matthew decides to leave, and he says, I don't care if he is your brother. I'm going to kill him one of these days. We cut back to the hotel. Mrs. Fletcher is up. It's 2:15 in the morning, and she notices the professor coming in, and both of them hear a siren. The Sheriff Cox, goes to a residence, and Ed is dead. The next morning, Mrs. Fletcher gets up, and she goes down the stairs, and the professor informs her of what happened. Matthew has been arrested for Ed's murder, is in the local jail, and he wants to know if she could help him. She agrees, and they go over to the sheriff's office. The sheriff does not want them to see Matthew and wants them to leave him alone. He is reluctant at first to allow Mrs. Fletcher to help him solve the crime. Sorry, that was my chair. And tells them basically what happened. They found Ed's body at around 2:30 because someone screamed and called it in. There are knife wounds all over the body, and he appears to have been shot. And they found the knife, a bloody knife, and gloves in Matthew's mother's garden at their house. And Mrs. Fletcher looks at the town map and says, well, because Matthew came home at that precise moment that they had come to investigate. And he says he was at the lake thinking and was nowhere near Ed or anything like that. But they found the evidence in his backyard, and she was like, well, he was at this lake here on the map. Why didn't he throw the knife there? Why bury it in the backyard where anyone could find it? The sheriff hesitates and thinks that Matthew is being framed. And then she says, well, then why is he in jail? And the sheriff says, for his own protection. So that no one will try to hurt him. So meanwhile, outside, Mr. Kelso is getting his mail. And 2 random boys come up and they ask him if he got a note from his wife in Shreveport. And that was mentioned in Steel Magnolias, so I'm assuming they're somewhere in New Orleans. I'm guessing. I don't know. So he says, yes, I got a letter from her on Tuesday, and she's still taking care of her sick mama. And then they said, well, did you hear about Ed? And he says, yes, I did. That's really sad. And he walks away and the boys go, "She ain't off in Shreveport taking care of her mama." And they walk away. Later, Mr. Kelso pulls up in his car because a lot of the boys have gathered in a specific spot in town. Andy is there. He's clearly drunk. And honestly, okay, somebody brought up in my Facebook group, All Things Murder, She Wrote, I think it was, or Murder, Jessica Fletcher, Murder, She Wrote, where a person said that they were rewatching the series and didn't realize how bad some of the acting is from the guest stars. And I try not to criticize like people's acting because I know how hard it is to act because I did drama classes and I was in theater in high school. But the actor that plays Andy, like in several of his scenes, like he puts his tongue at the roof of his mouth when he's paused and waiting for people to speak first and then he's supposed to say his lines. It's like he has this weird thing, and when he says his lines, he says them out really slowly and shows his teeth a lot. And I mean, it's really weird. I don't know what direction they were going in. It's just really weird. I don't know if the actor was going through something at the time or if he was trying to act like he was a hillbilly, because I've never seen anybody who they considered a hillbilly talk like that, but it's just really weird. I don't understand it. But Mr. Kelso gives a bunch of the boys liquor, and then he goes up and he says, "I was real sorry, Ed, or real sorry, Andy, about hearing about Ed. You know, I know he was like a brother to you." And he goes, You're not sorry that Ed died. Everybody knows you didn't like him." And he gets up in his face and he says, "Don't lie to me, don't call me son." And he says, "And everybody knows that your wife, whose name just so happens to be Jolene, 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 didn't go off to Shreveport to take care of her sick mama. She ran off with that salesman who came into town." And Mr. Kelso's like, "You're a liar." And he goes to try to go after Ed, but Andy gets the upper hand and goes after him. And he's like, you're right, I'm sorry." So the next morning, Mrs. Fletcher goes to the sheriff's office again to see about the coroner's report. And basically, the coroner is there and he's like, "You don't know who this is, Sheriff. This is the J.B. Fletcher. She can solve crime like it's nobody's business, and she writes about it too." And the sheriff does not seem to be impressed. So in the coroner's report, he says Ed was shot, and he was not shot in the place where he was taken. He was shot somewhere else and then put there. And then the stab wounds came post-mortem after he'd already been dead. So it was like overkill. And Sheriff Cox is a black man, and Mrs. Fletcher suggests bringing in the state cops. And he says, "Oh, you don't think I can handle it?" He said, "Being the black sheriff of this town, I got lots of things that I need to prove." So it's pride. He doesn't want Mrs. Fletcher to help him because of pride. Because if he can't solve it himself, that might look bad. If he brings in outside help, that might look bad. So there's a lot of factors here. But eventually, he gives up and lets Mrs. Fletcher look through Ed's personal effects. When she's looking through them, she notices that there are 2 lighters. One with the Cameron crest on it and just a regular lighter. And they just don't understand, why does he have 2 lighters? Mrs. Fletcher is leaving the sheriff's office when Linda says she wants her to go with her to talk to her father because her father is dead set that Matthew killed Ed. And she knows for a fact that Matthew is not the type of person that would murder someone, because I guess they're dating, I'm not sure. And Matthew is not seen again until the end of the episode. For some reason, most of the scenes where people talk to him in prison is off screen. So, as Mrs. Fletcher and Linda are driving in her car, she says that Ed boosted about having lots of money and he didn't have a job, so she didn't know where it came from. And Mrs. Fletcher says, well, Linda, I have to tell you, the atmosphere of this town scares me. It's like it's ready to explode, like a power keg. Hence the title. Good title. I like the title of this episode. So, they go to the Brenner farm, and Mr. Brenner basically says, I know for a fact that Matthew murdered my boy. And Mrs. Fletcher says, well, everyone says Matthew's a coward. He wouldn't use a gun, and that's how Ed was shot, was with a gun. And he says, he said, I don't really care, and I know he did it. And Mrs. Fletcher says, well, whether he did or whether he didn't, that's up for the courts to decide. And if you don't do something, Mr. Brenner, there's going to be a big, huge surge of violence that's going to happen in this town if you don't do something. So when Mrs. Fletcher gets back, she goes into the hotel, and the professor and Cassie Burns is sitting down to lunch, and she says, if I'm going to help Matthew, I need the truth from the two of you now. I know from the way that you've acted with each other that you're not just professor and student, and Matthew is your son. And I was like, damn, Mrs. Fletcher, you go, girl. I mean, she does not have anything called tact. I mean, she just lays it all out right there. And, and Cassie says, that's not true. Matthew's father was a decorated war soldier. And gets upset and walks away. And the professor's just like, you have to forgive her. She's lived a life for the last 22 years, and she herself believes it. And it's like, but how do you know that? How do you know he's your son? Like, and why? So many questions. That's another reason why I don't like this episode. Well, Mrs. Fletcher also confronts him on his alibi, saying that he came in at about 11 when he didn't come in until 2:15. He said he was with Cassie at her house, and that's why Mrs. Fletcher knew, because the hotel clerk told the professor, after he had told Mrs. Fletcher about the murder, that Cassie wanted him to come to her house, and she asked him if he needed directions to the house, and he said no. So she figured that he had been there before. So Linda also tells Mrs. Fletcher about the knife that Billy Willis pulled on Mr. Kelso, so she goes to the sheriff's office to do that. The professor and Cassie are walking in town. They notice that a bunch of men have gathered with Andy, including Peter Fargo, a local resident. And Andy is apparently the one that's leading it, and the professor says, what are you doing? And Andy says, I'm getting justice. But you know what? This doesn't concern you, because you don't live here. And he says, well, it concerns me if you're going to hurt that poor boy. And Andy says, I'm sorry, Miss Burns, but what's done is done, and it needs to be done, or something to that effect. I don't know. And we cut to Jessica at the sheriff's office, and she tells him, she says, Sheriff Cox, Billy Willis had a knife to Mr. Kelso's back. Possibly that could be what Ed had wounds all over him. certainly you have to check that out. He gets angry with her and he says, Mrs. Fletcher, I don't care whether there was a knife. I don't care what's going on. There's about to be a lynch mob out there, and I got to figure out what to do. And then she says, well, then why don't you call in the state cops? He said, no, I have to figure it out on my own, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Now go back to your hotel, lock your door, and wait this thing out. And I don't need any more interference from you. I will do it on my own. So Mrs. Fletcher, being the person she is, decides not to listen to him and goes to Mr. Kelso's bar. She goes in, it's closed. She calls out his name, and he doesn't answer. She goes into his office, and then he comes in the office and points a gun at her, and that's your visual aid, because I honestly couldn't find any good visual aid in the next episode, which I'll be talking about here in a few minutes. And basically her expression is how I feel about these episodes. So she asks him about the knife, and he says, well, ma'am, considering that it was behind my back, I don't know what it looked like. But I think it was a switchblade. And she asks him about Ed having lots of money, and he says, I don't know anything about that. And then he gets a phone call and finds out that there's a riot, and he tells her about it. Then he tells her that Matthew's the one that killed him. Plain and simple. She doesn't need to try to figure out if anyone else did. So we then cut to the sheriff's office. A bunch of people are out there. Willis is out there. Andy Crane. A dude named Charlie is out there, I think. And Andy says, bring out Matthew and let's get this thing settled, because justice will be served our way, not your way. And the sheriff says, I'm not going to do that, Andy. And he says, behind that badge and that gun, you're just a scared little old black man. And then what happens next is why I don't like this episode, because I don't get why they decided to do this. The Sheriff Cox gives his gun and his badge to his deputy, which I don't know who his deputy is. Deputy Morgan. And he then gets in the middle of all these extras and starts putting his fists up like he's going to fight with Andy. And I'm like, that's how you decided to handle this? Like, not call in the state police? I mean, how is this handling it? I mean, I don't understand. It makes absolutely no sense to me that he would do it this way. But we don't know what he's going to do, because at one point, Mrs. Fletcher and Mr. Kelso shows up, and she's like, aren't you going to stop this? And he goes, hell no. And when he gets into the middle of the street and starts going to fight like he's going to fight Andy, Mrs. Fletcher's like, this is ridiculous. And we don't know what's going to happen, because suddenly Mr. Brenner shows up. And he goes, hasn't there been enough violence? Hasn't there been enough stuff going on in this town? We don't need any more. And Andy, I guess, is drunk. I guess maybe that explains the weird acting. I don't know. And when Mr. Brenner tells him that he needs to stop and to give it up, Billy takes out his knife, and Miss Fletcher's like, Sheriff, and he goes, put that away. And when Andy realizes that Mr. Brenner isn't even, seems to be on the side of Matthew, or whatever you want to call it, he tries to hit him or hurt him. And Mr. Brenner's like, I believe that he's drunk and disorderly and disturbing the peace. I think you ought to arrest him, Sheriff. And I'm thinking, why didn't he just do that in the first place? What was the point of getting in the middle of it and acting like he was going to fight him? I mean, what was that going to prove? I don't get that. So they take I don't know why I keep saying that, Andy, into the police station, and Sheriff Cox lets Mrs. Fletcher interrogate him. And they're going through his pockets, and they notice that there is something with the Cameron family crest on it. And she says, "Where did you get that?" And he goes, "That happens to be my mama's maiden name. What's it to you?" And Sheriff Cox says, "You're going to answer her questions." And she said, "We happened to find a lighter in Ed's possession with the Cameron family crest on it." And he says, "Oh yeah, I let him borrow it because he forgot his lighter at Kelso's." And she said, "Well, his lighter was among his possessions, so did he go back and get it?" And Sheriff Cox is like, "Maybe you ought to tell us what happened after the fight, Andy." "Okay, well, after the fight, we decided to go into a neighboring town to shoot some pool, and he wanted a cigarette, so I gave him my lighter. And then, because he realized he left his lighter at Kelso's bar, and then eventually around 12:30 we got tired of playing pool, so it took us back to the station. And then he said the weirdest thing. He said he had to go to the bank and get his lighter, but there was no banks open that late at night. And I don't know where he got his money. He was always saying he was going to go to the bank, even late at night." So Andy is locked up, and Mrs. Fletcher figures it all out. And our killer turns out to be Mr. Kelso. And the motivation is what made me not like this episode. Mr. Kelso killed Ed because his wife, Jolene, he accused her of cheating on him, and she denied it and laughed at him, so he picked up a blunt object and hit her with it and killed her. Ed witnessed all of this and had come back to the bar that night, and this was like a year ago or 2 years ago or something, and he had been blackmailing him ever since about the murder. So he had went back that night to get his lighter and wanted more money from Mr. Kelso, and Mr. Kelso had had enough and decided to shoot him with his gun that had the special bullets. And he decided to frame Matthew for it. I mean, are you kidding, episode writers? Why not have him just kill him because he was a stupid bully? I mean, why have him kill his wife off screen? I don't understand. I really don't. Matthew gets off scot-free, and him and Linda decide to go on the road together, and Cassie refuses to acknowledge that Matthew is the professor's son, and that's the end of the episode. It was really, really weird. I didn't like it with the racial undertones. Like, I don't think it was handled very well, and I know this was 1986, but I just didn't understand, like, why didn't the sheriff ask for help? I know that there were so many factors, but getting in the middle of it and fighting just seemed to be the wrong way. Also, Mr. Kelso's motivation for killing Ed, like, why couldn't it have been because he was a bully, because he was being mean, maybe he was trying to rob him? It could have been self-defense. Why did he have to kill his wife off screen? Just, I don't get it. And then, that has a lot to say about our next episode. Murder in the Electrical Cathedral. Air date February 16th, 1986, and Season 2, Episode 16. This episode starts with the opening credits with the clouds and stuff, and then we see, it looks like we're in a church, but it's actually a TV studio made to look like the church, hence the Electrical Cathedral. We get introduced to the Reverend Willie John Fargo, who is a television minister and is encouraging people to donate money to his cause to help people. And we have his brother Ed and his wife, Willie John's wife, Sister Ruth. They finish the broadcast, and Sister Ruth also encourages everyone to vote. To donate. And he gets done, and his brother Earl goes up to him and says, "We got it! We got the will!" And he's like, "Yay!" So we then cut to Harvey McCormick and his son Sam McCormick, who are, I guess they're in the oil business. I'm not entirely sure. It's not made abundantly clear. But, they're doing some sort of demonstration with oil, and Sam comes in and is like, "They've done it. She's given their money to, that stupid Willie John person," and he goes, "Over my dead body." Meanwhile, Jessica comes, and this is Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain. Yeah, I was in that musical in high school, and I can honestly say that that is the weirdest musical that Rodgers and Hammerstein ever freaking made. I mean, it is the weirdest musical. And I played the role of Jessie, like a character that was made up for me. It was a weird musical. That's all I gotta say. But at least we have a definitive location. So Mrs. Fletcher is visiting her friend Carrie McCormick. And according to the trivia on IMDb, Mildred Nightwick starred with Angela Lansbury in The Court Gesture in 1955, and apparently saying that it's been 30 years since they've seen each other might be a nod to their working on that movie, which I've never seen. I don't know what it's about. I would like to see that someday. But she's visiting Jessica. Jessica's visiting her, and she's like, "It's so nice to see you, Jessica. I can't believe that you're a best-selling mystery novelist now. I never thought that would happen." And she was like, "I know, it came as a complete surprise to me too." And as they're visiting, suddenly the door flies open, and Harvey, which is played by the guy that I used to confuse with Carl Malden because they kind of look similar, but it's actually Richard Hurd, and he played Ernie on the Golden Girls, that did the famous scene where he was impotent, and Rose, even though she's supposed to be really stupid, knew what that was right away. And then when they're at the restaurant, the scene where he's like, "It's time, Rose. Check, please." I just love that. He's playing Harvey, and he comes in and he's like, "You cannot do this. You cannot give money to this person, this stupid Reverend Willie John. I mean, he's not a real reverend, and he's swindled you and all this other stuff." And she's like, "You have enough money of your own. You don't need mine." And he's like, "We'll see. We're going to take you to court. That's what we're going to do." And they leave, and she has a mini heart attack. We go to what looks like a hospital, but it actually turns out to be a clinic that Willie John has managed to build and put close to the electrical cathedral due to the donations from all his viewers. Nurse Sue Beth is helping, as well as Dr. Mark Brady. And she's there. She's fine, it seems. Everything seems to be fine. And she's like, "Jessica, please don't let them get my money. Just please don't let them take my money. I want it to go to Willie John to help all those poor people that he helps." So Jessica stays there, and it seems as if Carrie McCormick is gonna get better. But then something happens. Sam goes in there and says that she signed a new will, and suddenly she dies. And no one knows why. Mrs. Fletcher sees Nurse Sue Beth walking out of her room. And Mrs. Fletcher notices when she goes in there that there is a vial of something left on the floor, and she picks it up and puts it in a Ziploc bag. And there are no police officers in this episode, which was really weird, and one of the reasons why I didn't like it. This district attorney, Fred Willicard, is the one and sole person who has to solve the crime, and the reason given for this is that the whole police force is on vacation. Like, what? I literally was like, you're joking, right? There's no policeman in this. So Mrs. Fletcher has to solve the crime herself because the district attorney doesn't know what to do. So it turns out the vial contains the stuff that you would use if you're a diabetic, insulin. And it was inserted into her IV tube. Mrs. Fletcher gets acquainted with Reverend Willie John. He shows her his house and shows her the studio, and it's all connected and built together, which, how did he get so much money to do this? I mean, I guess he's been doing this for years, and I thought at first, this must be a cult. But unfortunately, no, it's not. So, I'm sorry. So, he discloses the fact that he's a diabetic to Mrs. Fletcher, and he talks about how he met Ruth in England and realized he was a diabetic, and she nursed him back to health and makes sure that he gets his shots and does so on time. So of course, he's now the main suspect because he's a diabetic. Sue Beth is considered a suspect because Mrs. Fletcher saw her come out of her room, but that is a dead end. They think that Sam's a suspect because he forged her signature and tried to change the will, but it turns out he gets caught. And that's the end of that. It's also note that his wife, Tammy Lee, gets abused by him. I mean, why they decided to throw that in there, I don't understand. It never gets resolved. It's just something that's brought up in conversation, and I don't know. So Harvey and Sam are trying to fight Earl and Willie John for the will. They want to arrest him because the death of their mother happened in his clinic and not in an actual hospital. There's lots of things going on. Eventually, all signs point to Willie John because they find his fingerprints on the vial that Mrs. Fletcher found at the scene. But Mrs. Fletcher figures it all out, and our killer turns out to be Sister Ruth. And this is the worst motivation in the history so far of the show. The reason why Sister Ruth decided to kill Carrie was because Reverend Willie John is not administrating to his husbandly duties and not paying attention to her. And she can't divorce him because there would be too much scandal. So she figured framing him for murder and sending him to jail was better. And how Mrs. Fletcher figured it out was the vial had no fingerprints on it, but the vial that was on the floor had fingerprints on it, and Sister Ruth was a nurse in England and nursed Reverend Willie John back to health. And she would know how to administrate that without it being actual, and then wanted to frame Willie John for it. And I honestly, guys, I just realized something. As I'm recording this, I just realized something. In the last several weeks, I have covered 6 episodes that has to do with wives doing something that results in murder, or husbands too. Okay, the first one is Murder Digs Deep. The lady in that episode, her husband's not paying attention to her. just like Sister Ruth's husband's not paying attention to her. And she, like, hires a fake Native American and a guy from a university to plant fake Native American artifacts on land so that her husband will buy it, so that he, I don't know, will get bankrupt or something. But the Native American, fake Native American, gets greedy and she kills him, and her plan is exposed. Don't know what she was hoping to happen there. The second one is Murder by Appointment Only, where a guy is about to marry a former prostitute, and he thinks that she's having an affair with this actor guy, and he's right, and he kills her in a jealous rage. The third episode, is Trial by Error, where the man arranges to kill his wife via a car crash, and then his mistress kills her husband in self-defense. In Keep the Home Fries Burning, which is episode 4 of this theme I'm sensing, is a woman poisons the strawberry preserves to punish her best friend who is having an affair with her husband, hoping that by killing her best friend, her and her husband will be able to get back together and be with each other, and she accidentally poisons other people in the process. In Power Keg, our main killer kills the town bully because his wife was cheating on him and he killed her and he witnessed it and was blackmailing him. And then in this one, Murder in the Electrical Cathedral, Sister Ruth kills Carrie McCormick, an innocent woman who has done nothing to her, to frame her husband for murder so that she can... I don't know exactly what her motivation is. Like, oh, he's not paying attention to me. If I divorced him, there would be too much scandal. But if I frame him for murder, that's better? I don't know. But, like, what are the writers trying to do? That's 6 episodes where something has to do with marriage, and that actually goes back to Murder in the Afternoon, where the main character is murdered because she doesn't give him money or something. I don't know. It's really weird. But, yeah, what are the writers trying to say this season? Marriage equals death? Like, I don't know. It's really interesting. But let's go over our guest stars in the first episode, which was Power Keg. Like I said, we have Pat Cornley as our murderer, who runs the local bar. I know he was known for Murphy Brown, but I don't know what else he's been in. He died in 2006 at the age of 76. Like I said, he's known for Murphy Brown, like I said, Mr. Destiny, Kiss My Grits, a movie in 1982, and The Hand. His last known credit is some movie from 2006 called Come Early Morning. He was in 115 different things. He did some voiceover work for Hey Arnold, All Dogs Go to Heaven, the TV series, All Dogs Go to Heaven 2. He was in the Saved by the Bell Wedding in Las Vegas, Cadney and Lacey, Night Court, Simon and Simon, Mr. Belvedere, The Stepford Children, Falcon Crest, Hill Street Blues, this is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote, Magnum P.I., Moonlighting, Scarecrow and Mrs. King, Aftermath, the Calendar Girl movies, Murders, Saint Elsewhere, Heart to Heart, Barnaby Jones, Lou Grant, The Betty White Show. So, I mean, he had a lot of stuff, and he was really good in this episode. I liked his performance. Cassie was played by Montclair Costo. Sorry, I said your name wrong. She is known for Ordinary People, Let's Scare Jessica to Death, The Adventures of Buckaroo something, and Indecent Proposal. She's still alive. Her last Known credit is a video short called Assisted Loving. She guest starred on Judging Amy, Chicago Hope, Santa Barbara, In the Heat of the Night. This is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. She was in a lot of TV movies of the week. Heart to Heart, Lou Grant, Little House on the Prairie, Helen Crane. I don't remember that one. The original Incredible Hulk, The Fitzpatricks, The Waltons, Miss Rosemary Hunter. I remember that. Barnaby Jones, Kojak, Ironside. So she had a good career. She's still alive. She should act more. Linda Brenner was played by Cindy Fisher. Wonder if she's related to Carrie Fisher. Probably not. She is known for The Blues Brothers, The Swiss Family Robinson, The Stone Boy, and Remington Steele. She will appear in another episode of Murder, She Wrote, which is her last credit, so I'll go over her credits when I get to that episode. Brian Lane Green played Matthew, our suspected murderer, but he wasn't the murderer. And I think I recognized him from something. Oh, he played Brian Bodine on All My Children. That's what I recognized him from. He's known for All My Children, Highway to Heaven, Friends and Family, and Circuit. His last known credit is Circuit in 2001. He was also on the soap opera Another World as Sam Fuller. He guest starred on Madlock. He was on Days of Our Lives, The Law, and Harry McGraw. I'm going to watch that eventually. This is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. He guest starred on Hotel, Highway to Heaven, Aftermath, and Breaking Away. So he was only in 16 different things. But he was a good actor. And apparently he is a singer, so maybe he was doing his own singing. Jackie Earl Harley played the role of Billy Willis, and I think I know what he's known for, and this is a really early role for him. He's known for Watchmen, Little Children, Nightmare on Elm Street, the 2010 remake that sucked, and Shutter Island. He's been in 59 different things. This is probably his only episode of Murder, She Wrote, I bet. Yep, but he guest starred on MacGyver before that, The American Playhouse, Breaking Away, The Love Boat, Bad News Braves he was in the Bad News Braves, The Waltons, Planet of the Apes TV series, and he was on the Carol Burnett Show. Cool. And he's still alive and he's acting. Good for him. Dorian Harewood was our sheriff, and he looked familiar. He was in he's a character actor and has been in a lot of things. He's known for Full Metal Jacket, Space Jam, the original Sudden Death, and Assault on Precinct 13 remake in 2005. He's been in 179 different things. His last credit was 2020 in Criminal Minds. I love Criminal Minds. He did some voiceover work for Handy Mandy and The Spectacular Spider-Man. Was in Terminator, The Sarah Connor Chronicles, Batman, voiceover work, Land Before Time, Private Practice, Bill and Mandy's Adventure, Las Vegas, Little House on the Prairie, miniseries. Seventh Heaven, yes, that's where I recognize him, Seventh Heaven. But he's been in so many things I've seen. He did a lot of voiceover work, but I'm trying to see if this is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. Yep, that's That's a shame. But he was in a lot of things, and he's still alive and doing stuff. So you go, dude. You were a great sheriff. Peter Fargo, one of the dudes in the mob, was played by John Davis Johnson. He is still alive. He is known for 48 Hours, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Annie Hall. His last known credit is 2018 in a short called Screwy Lucy. He's been in 125 different things. He was on the client list, JAG, Walker, Texas Ranger, Dark Angel, ER, Dark Skies, Madlock, Reasonable Doubt, Murder in the Mississippi, the original MacGyver, Married with Children, Twilight Zone, Cadney and Lacey, Simon and Simon, The A-Team, TJ Hooker, Fantasy Island. This is the only episode of Murder, She Wrote. So he had a good career. And our murder victim, Ed Brenner, was played by Jeff Osterhedge. I know, I'm sorry. He is known for Knight Rider, Darnett, and Mystique of the Red Death. His last known credit is 2010, Taken by Force. He guest starred in Madlock, Simon and Simon, Moonlighting, and he was in Funeral at the 55 Mile. I didn't recognize him. It must have been a very, not a memorable role. Scarecrow and Mrs. King, Knight Rider. So he was only in 30 things. How sad. I guess he always played bullies. Maybe he was a bully in the other one too. The professor was played by Craig Stevens. He died in 2000 at the age of 81. He is known for The Deadly Malice, Peter Gunn, as Peter Gunn, wow. And the Gunn movie that introduced him, and The Invisible Man. His last known credit is Marcus Welby, A Holiday Affair in 1988, and this is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. So he retired after this. He guest starred on The Love Boat, Hotel, Fantasy Island, Happy Days, Quincy MD, the original Dallas, BJ and the Bear, The Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew Mysteries, The Incredible Hawk. I mean, you're awesome, Mr. Craig Stevens. And Mr. Brenner was played by Scott Wellman, who I recognized from something. He died last year at the age of 92. Known for Night of the Locusts, Sands of the Karobi or something, and The Longest Day. Last known credit is 2000's The President's Men, which I guess is a remake of the movie called that, isn't it? Or is it All the President's Men? He guest starred in Simon and Simon, the original A-Team, let's see, Fantasy Island, Knots Landing. Oh, okay. He was in Hit, Run, and Homicide, Behind It All in the first season. And then he'll appear in 2 other episodes after this. No wonder his name and how he looked familiar. I'm so sorry. And last but not least, before we get to the second episode, guest stars, Andy Crane was played by Larry Wilcox. Larry is still alive, and he is known for Chips, The Ray Bradbury Theater, Death of a Centerfold, and The Dirty Dozen Next Mission. He's been in 58 things, is apparently still acting because there are several things that he's in production of. He guest starred on 30 Rock, Pacific Blue, After School Special, and he will appear in several other episodes of Murder, She Wrote, and hopefully his performance will be better than it was in this episode. Alright, that's all our guest stars in this episode. Let's go to the next one. Sorry it's taking so long. Okay, so Bambi Benton played the role of the nurse, Sue Beth. She's still alive. She's known for X-Ray, Fantasy Island, The Love Boat, and McCloud. Her last known credit is Love Boat. She was in 24 different things, and this is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. Apparently she retired, and she's not acting anymore. She didn't get really much to do in this episode. Okay. Frank Booner played the role of Earl, Willie John's brother. Oh, he recently passed away in June at the age of 79. I didn't know that. He was known for WKRP in Cincinnati. The new WKRP in Cincinnati, and Just the 10 of Us with Heather Langenkamp. He was in Saved by the Bell, The New Class. His last known credit is Under the Hollywood Sign in 2014. And this is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. He guest starred on The Scarecrow and Mrs. King, Simon and Simon. That must have been a very popular show. I've always wanted to watch that. The Love Boat, The Facts of Life Goes to Paris, Fantasy Island, Most Wanted, Police Woman. So, I mean, he was in a lot of good stuff. He was in that, but I didn't recognize him. I mean, he didn't get to do a lot in this episode. Willie John was played by Steve Forrest. He looked familiar, and I think I saw him in something else that I watched on TV. He died in 2013 at the age of 87. Mommy Dearest, that's what it was. He's known for Mommy Dearest, The Longest Day, Spies Like Us, and So Big. His last known credit is a 2003 movie called SWAT. And he will appear in several other episodes of Murder, She Wrote, so we'll go over more of his credentials then. I just gotta remember that name. Sometimes it's really hard to remember if they appear in more than one episode. Our murderer was played by Judy Grissom. Geeson, sorry. She's still alive. She's known for 10 Remington Place, To Sir with Love, The Lords of Salem, and 31. She's still acting. She's in a bunch of upcoming projects like Waking Up Dead. She guest starred on The Gilmore Girls. Love that show. Mad About You. Love Boat, The Next Wave. Baywatch Nights. Star Trek Voyager. Hotel, The A-Team. And she was in Paint Me a Murder. That's why she looks so familiar. That was one of my favorite episodes in season 1, Paint Me a Murder. And this is her last episode of Murder, She Wrote. Wow. So cool. Good for you. Did a good job. Richard Hurd, like I said, played Harvey McCormick. Let's see what else he's been in. I know Golden Girls. Oh, he died last year. I didn't know that. At the age of 87. He's known for All the President's Men, Get Out, The Mule, and The China Syndrome. He guest starred in Rosorian Isles, Betty White's Off Their Rockers, CSI Miami, Love's Unfolding Dream, Desperate Housewives, Ghost Whisperer, NYPD Blue, Everwood, The District, Family Law, Star Trek Voyager, Jag, Caroline in the City, Seinfeld, Pacific Blue, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I don't remember that. Grace Under Fire, Walker Texas Ranger, ER, Robin Hood, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, Quantum Leap, and he will be in another episode of Murder, She Wrote, so we'll go over more of his credentials then. But he guest starred on The Golden Girls. Yeah, I love that episode. Art Heigl played his son. He is still alive, and he is known for Porky's, Black Christmas, ENG, and Speed Zone. And he is still working. He's got a bunch of projects that's coming up. Good Witch, he was in Good Witch, Christmas in Montana, Northern Lights of Christmas, lots of Christmas movies. I'm sure you've seen him. And he will appear in another episode of Murder, She Wrote, so we'll go over more of his credentials later. And our murder victim was played by Mildred Natwick, who has worked with Angela Lansbury in The Court Jester, as they say. She died in 1994 at the age of 89. She's known for The Trouble with Harry, Dangerous Liaisons, The Quiet Man, and Barefoot in the Park. Her last known credit was Dangerous Liaisons in 1988. This is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. She guest starred on High Castle and McCormick, Trapper John M.D., Alice, The Bob Newhart Show, McMullen and Wife, The Most Deadly Game, I don't know what that is, Bonanza, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and in The Court Jester, who did she play? Or The Court Jouster? Which was in 1955. She played Gessa. So, she was really good in this episode. If only she didn't die. I mean, sad that she... And Dick Van Patten played the role of District Attorney who had to solve the crime all by himself, but Jessica solved it for him. He died in 2015 at the age of 86. He's known for Spaceballs, love that movie, Robin Hood Men in Tights, Westworld, and Soviet Green, loved Westworld. His last known credit is Hot in Cleveland, love that show. That 70s show, Seventh Heaven, Touched by an Angel, Love Boat, The Next Wave, Beyond Belief, Fact or Fiction, Heaven Help Us, Blake's Law, The Golden Palace. That was a spin-off of The Golden Girls. And this is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. Awesome career. Apparently he guest starred on The Golden Girls as well. I remember him. I think he dated Sophia. And that's it. That's all our guest stars. I hope you all enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed talking about them. They were really weird. I did not like them. I did not like that Sister Ruth killed poor Carrie McCormick because Reverend Willie John wasn't paying attention to her. Like, how was that going to help your marriage? I mean, really. And tell me if you think the whole marriage thing, what do you think of the whole marriage thing in the comments below? Because I do read all your comments, and it would be cool to have some more to talk about. I'm confident in saying that the next episode I'll be covering is the return of Harry McGraw, Jerry Orsbeck, and any episode with him is worth watching. Because him and Angela Lansbury were best friends and they're both Tony Award-winning actors. So any episode with him is great. And I'm going to try to find at least the pilot episode of Harry McGraw, The Law on Harry McGraw, so I can talk about that. And I'll see. Happy crime solving, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good day, night, depending on whenever you listen to this. And I hope everyone is staying safe and is having a wonderful summer. And thank you all for your continued support. It means the world to me. Bye now.